What is the point of Jujutsu Kaisen? People always like to say that it's just a bunch of fights or that the series is all hype and there's no deeper meaning. But something happened recently that pretty much proves that wrong. As a matter of fact, it's a quote from Sukuna, a character that, of all people, most haters would assume he probably has no character. Which is why I'd like to examine what he said and how it ties together the entire philosophy of Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, before I say anything else, this video will contain major spoilers. So if you're not caught up in the manga, then do not watch this video. Anyway, this quote comes from chapter 248. Yuji confronts Sukuna, but realizes he's lost in thought. We then turn to Sukuna, who is reflecting on these recent fights and feels pissed off for some reason. He reflects on the discussion he had with Kashimo, confirmed that indeed he only lives by his hunger and only sees people as playthings. But then he's reminded of his fight against Jogo and how everyone else is driven by ideals rather than impulses. People like Jogo are driven by visions. He considers the fact that all the philosophical talk is probably people just talking big before they're about to die. But then he turns to Yuji, and since he shared a body with him and could look into his soul, he knows that Yuji is the real deal. He knows that Yuji is truly driven by his pursuit of defeating Sukuna. It's at this point in the chapter that we get what are easily some of the most important panels in all of JJK. I know his ideal to be unbreakable. Unfortunately, I have learned that someone far weaker can go toe-to-toe with me and achieve his ideal through strength of will. And that really irritates me. In other words, I was so great in stature that I held no ideals, even despised them. Here is where I would argue we are given the central theme. The central conflict, really. On one side you have Sukuna, who stands to show that ideals are all irrelevant in the face of overwhelming power and that the world is defined by whoever stands at the top. On the other hand, you have Yuji, someone who by no means is the strongest, but he has worked to achieve unbreakable strength of will. As Sukuna himself explains, Yuji's very existence is an insult to Sukuna, as it shows that a person can achieve what they want without being the strongest. As a result, this conflict raises an important question. What is the point of strength? And when you frame it like this, suddenly the entire story of Jujutsu Kaisen falls into place. To explain what I mean, let's go all the way back to chapter 1. Actually, before I do that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. So you go back to chapter 1, and obviously it sets up the plot of JJK, but it also serves as the foundation for Yuji's character arc. Yuji is presented as the strongest kid around, even stronger than the adults, but he has no interest in sports and would rather mess around. So he has this power and he doesn't want to do anything with it. Right away, we're presented with this idea that power can be pointless. It raises this question of what are you supposed to do when you're already the strongest? Because here, Yuji doesn't have anything he's striving towards. He just wants to have fun and take care of his granddad. So then we cut to his granddad. At this point, it's worth noting that Yuji says he's bored all the time, reinforcing the idea that he's pretty aimless right now. Anyway, his granddad says to Yuji, "You're a strong kid, so help people." And then he dies. So to honor his grandfather, Yuji passes his life of boredom for a life of struggle by taking and eating one of Sukuna's fingers. So we move from Yuji living a life of leisure to a point where now he has this burden to carry. In this sense, you could actually compare Yuji to Sukuna, because in chapter 1, Yuji is like the Sukuna of his circle. As shown by his feat against the teacher, he makes his own rules because he's the strongest. But because he's the strongest, he has no desire to work towards anything, leaving him incredibly bored. We also have Sukuna, who was able to make his own rules because he is the strongest. When you compare these two characters, the implication is that Sukuna is also bored like Yuji was. In this context, the presumption would be that the reason Sukuna is irritated by Yuji is because Yuji used to be like Sukuna, but now he's working towards something else. In other words, Yuji is like standing proof that Sukuna's way of living is wrong. Not ethically wrong necessarily, more so that he's missing something or that his worldview is flawed. But it's worth noting that there's a big gap between chapter 1 and chapter 248. Naturally, the question you're probably wondering is, how did we get here? Because if this is supposed to be the central theme, then we should be able to point at it throughout the story rather than 2 points that are over 200 chapters apart. And this comes in two forms. First, Yuji's character arc following chapter 1. and second, through all of the strongest characters in JJK. So first, let's talk about Yuji. So the beginning of Yuji's arc is use your strength to help people. Naturally, as Yuji goes through this induction and he joins the school, he goes into it with the mindset of, I'm gonna be one of the good guys. And we see this in the way he tries to help people and save as many people as he can. Then we get to Junpei, who kind of rattles this view. Because Junpei, for the most part, is innocent. He is powerless for all intents and purposes, and he's ultimately punished for it. Yuji strives to protect him in his ideal of being the good guy, and he is punished for it. Mahito uses Junpei as he dies because Mahito can get away with it. It's at this point that Yuji is mocked by Mahito and Sukuna, giving us the first challenge to Yuji's ideal of being the good guy. It's the first suggestion that it doesn't matter why you're fighting, only that you're strong. This is challenged again and again in Shibuya as Yuji watches more people die and he's powerless to stop it, even though he was fighting for all of the right reasons. He blames himself for all of the deaths Sukuna caused. But then Yuji is reunited with Todo, who tells him that he has to keep fighting because he's been entrusted with the lives of the fallen. This is when Yuji stands back up and decides to fight in order to carry on the will of his lost friends. This is also where we revisit this question of what it means to be strong. Before in Chapter 1, Yuji was the strongest because he had the most athletic ability. But here, the suggestion is that being strong is standing when everyone else has fallen. In other words, the strong are those who are left standing. They are made strong simply by being survivors. And so it becomes this circle of surviving and then continuing to survive in order to justify that, which is implied by Sukuna's choice of words when he refers to Yuji's will as unbreakable. He doesn't call him powerful. In fact, he considers him weak, but he acknowledges and is forced to respect his survivability. And you can see this theme of survival in a lot of the characters in Jujutsu Kaisen. For example, a lot of Toji's motivation is being a survivor. He leaves the Zenin clan to prove that he can survive on his own. And he takes on Gojo, the strongest sorcerer, in an effort to prove to himself that he can't be broken. We also get a hint of this when Jogo fights Sukuna. He's completely outclassed, but Sukuna pays respect to him by calling him strong simply because he was able to survive in that fight for as long as he did. And then we get a different take on this with Gojo. Gojo, like Sukuna, is the strongest, except Gojo actually has people he wants to protect, but they're weak compared to him, so a lot of his friends end up dying. As a result, Gojo views himself as a survivor, and he uses his power to continue protecting the people close to him. So you can use this theme of survival to make a number of interpretations throughout the story and with a number of characters. The irony of all this is that Sukuna goes back and forth between respecting these survivor-type characters, and then only respecting the strong. For example, you'll get a chapter like the Jogo fight, but then you'll get something like the Kashimo fight where Sukuna basically laughs in his face, and he continually mocks Yuji again and again, sometimes completely ignoring him like he's not even worth thinking about. I would argue part of this seeming conflict is because Sukuna almost knows he's wrong and doesn't want to admit it. Plus, he's still a troll at heart, so he mocks people even though people like Yuji irritate him. Part of it might be because there is a genuine difference between a character like Kashimo and a character like Yuji. Kashimo, being naturally strong, doesn't have the same kind of resolve as someone like Yuji, and Sukuna can probably tell the difference. In any event, this one chapter clearly shows how everything ties together. It shows that the central theme of JJK is this question of what does it mean to be strong? Is it being the most powerful, or is it being a survivor? It's kinda why I think Sukuna will ultimately end up as the final villain rather than Geto, but of course, I could be totally wrong. On that note, now I'd like to hear what you think. What do you think about this quote? What do you think is the theme of JJK? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then make sure to check out my video on the art of Jujutsu Kaisen. In that video, I analyzed Jujutsu Kaisen's artistic evolution. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.